No, but why should I betray a secret I have kept so long? It is one thing to deceive a king, and quite another to hide from the cricket in the rushes and the little bird in the chimney. Besides, the bastards were there for all to see. Robert's bastards, what of them? He fathered 8, to the best of my knowing, Varus said as he wrestled with a saddle. Their mothers were copper and honey, chestnut and butter, yet the babes were all black as ravens, and as ill-omened, it would seem. So when Joffrey, Marcella and Tommen slid out between your sister's thighs, each as golden as the sun, the truth was not hard to glimpse. Tyrion shook his head. If she had borne only one child for her husband, it would have been enough to disarm suspicion, but then she would not have been Cersei. Tyrion 3, A Clash of Kings. So, who is like Cersei, but not Cersei? Catelyn Stark. Let's compare the pair. Catelyn Stark was born 264 to 265 AC, somewhere in that range, while Cersei was born 266 AC. Catelyn's mother, Minessa Went, died in childbirth, leaving 3 children, sometimes between 271 AC and 278 AC. Joanna Lannister, mother of Cersei, also died in childbirth, also leaving 3 children, dying 273 AC. Both were daughters of Lord Paramount, the Riverlands and the Westerlands respectively. Both Catelyn and Cersei are the eldest child. They became the lady of the house in their pre-teens. They had disappointing younger siblings, married war heroes, and survived their husbands, who died within weeks of each other. And both their husbands had bastards. Cersei, we know, cheated on Robert. In the conversation with Eddard at the end of A Game of Thrones, we infer that she hates Robert because he was still in love with Lyanna. How could they have all been so blind? The truth was there in front of them all the time, written on the children's faces. Ned felt sick. I remember Robert, as he was the day he took over the throne, every inch a king, he said quietly. 1,000 other women might have loved him with all their hearts. What did he do to make you hate him so? Her eyes burned green fire in the dusk, like the lioness that was her sigil. The night of our wedding feast, the first time we shared a bed, he called me by your sister's name. He was on top of me, in me, stinking of wine, and he whispered, Lyanna. Eddard 12, A Game of Thrones. But in A Feast for Crows, we find out she only cheats on Robert after she finds out he was cheating on her, with one of his Estamont cousins during a visit to Greenstone. The Estamonts were her good kin through Robert, whose father had taken one of them to wife, in what must have been a fit of lust or madness. By the time Cersei wed the king, Robert's lady mother was long dead, though both of her brothers had turned up for the wedding, and stayed for half a year. Robert had later insisted on returning the courtesy with a visit to Estamont, a mountainous little island off Cape Wrath. The dank and dismal fortnight Cersei spent at Greenstone, the seat of House Estamont, was the longest of her young life. Jaime dubbed the castle green shit at first sight, and soon had Cersei doing it too. Elsewise, she passed her days watching her royal husband hawk, hunt and drink with his uncles, and bludgeon various male cousins senseless in Greenshit's yard. There'd been a female cousin too, a chunky little widow with breasts as big as melons, whose husband and father had both died at Storm's End during the siege. Her father was good to me, Robert told her, and she and I would play together when the two of us were small. It did not take him long to start playing with her again. As soon as Cersei closed her eyes, the king would steal off to console the poor lonely creature. One night she had Jaime follow him to confirm her suspicions. When her brother returned, he asked if she wanted Robert dead. No, she replied, I want him horned. She liked to think that was the night when Joffrey was conceived. Cersei 5, A Feast for Crows. This might seem strange, but the young, proud Cersei Lannister was going to suffer her arranged marriage until Robert was proven to have cheated himself. How many? Littlefinger shrugged. Rivulets of moisture twisted down the back of his cloak. Does it matter? If you bed enough women, some will give you presents, and His Grace has never been shy on that account. I know he's acknowledged that boy at Storm's End, the one he fathered the night Lord Stannis wed. He could hardly do otherwise. The mother was a Florent, niece to the Lady Selyse, one of her bedmaids. Renly says that Robert carried the girl upstairs during the feast, and broke in the wedding bed, whilst Stannis and his bride were still dancing. Lord Stannis seems to think that was a blot on the honour of his wife's house, so when the boy was born he shipped him off to Renly. He gave Ned a sideways glance. I've also heard whispers that Robert got a pair of twins on a serving wench at Castle Rock 3 years ago when he went west for Lord Tywin's tourney. Cersei had the babes killed and sold the mother to a passing slaver. Too much of an affront to Lannister pride that close to home. Ned Stark grimaced. Ugly tales like that were told of every great lord in the realm. He could believe it of Cersei Lannister readily enough, but would the king stand by and let it happen? The Robert he had known would not have. But the Robert he had known had never been so practiced at shutting his eyes to things he did not wish to see. Eddard 9, A Game of Thrones. So imagine, if you will, how a similarly young, proud Catelyn Tully might have reacted to Jon Snow brought home after Robert's rebellion. Some readers know, or rather strongly suspect, Jon is Lyanna's bastard child by Prince Rhaegar, protected by his uncle Eddard out of love for his sister. But at this time, neither the books have confirmed this, nor could the character of Catelyn know this. She takes at face value that she was betrayed by Ned, and worse, has the proof of that betrayal paraded before her on a daily basis. Cersei might have had the boy killed. Snow, the boy is called, Pycelle said unhelpfully. I glimpsed him once at Winterfell, the Queen said, though the Starks did their best to hide him. He looks very like his father. Her husband's byblows had his look as well, though at least Robert had the grace to keep them out of sight. Once, after that sorry business with the cat, he made some noises about bringing some base-born daughter of his to court. Do as you please, she told him, but you will find that the city is not a healthy place for a growing girl. The bruises those words had won her had been hard to hide from Jaime, but they heard no more about the bastard girl. Catelyn Tully was a mouse, or she would have smothered this Jon Snow in his cradle. Instead, she has left the filthy task to me. Snow shares Lord Eddard's taste for treason too, she said. The father would have handed the realm to Stannis. The son has given him lands and castles. Cersei 4, A Feast for Crows. Whoever Jon's mother had been, Ned must have loved her fiercely, for nothing Catelyn said would persuade him to send the boy away. It was one thing she could never forgive him. She had come to love her husband with all her heart, but she had never found it in her to love Jon. She might have overlooked a dozen bastards for Ned's sake, so long as they were out of sight. Jon was never out of sight, and as he grew, he looked more like Ned than any of the Trueborn sons she bore him. Somehow that made it worse. Jon must go, she said now. Catelyn 2, A Game of Thrones. But despite the similarities, Catelyn and Cersei do have some differences. Thus, for Catelyn, murder was neither a good nor obvious option. The ruthlessness that is personified in Tywin, and inherited by his daughter, is a function of Westerland geographic circumstances. They are resource-rich, with a secure, nigh impregnable castle, destroying their enemies with impunity, like the Rains and the Tarbecks and Elia and Aerys, is not a luxury afforded to the Riverlands, and House Tully. The Riverlands is a rump state, a geographic entity created by House Targaryen out of a no-man's land fought over for centuries by the Ironborn, Westerlands, Vale, North, Stormlands and the Reach. The one king, who did try to maintain an independent kingdom of the Riverlands, Christopher IV of House Mud, could only keep it by maintaining a perfect military strategy. Perfection is unsustainable, and an unstable bedrock on which to build any lasting institution. Here lies Christopher, the fourth of his name, king of the rivers and the hills. Her father had told her his story once. He ruled from the trident to the neck. thousands of years before Jenny and her prince, in the days when the kingdoms of the first men were falling one after the other before the onslaught of the Andals. The Hammer of Justice, they called him. He fought 100 battles and won 99, or so the singers say, and when he raised his castle it was strongest in Westeros. She put her hand on her son's shoulder. He died in his 100th battle, when the 7 Andal kings joined forces against him. The 5th Christopher was not his equal, and soon the kingdom was lost, and then the castle, and last of all the line. With Christopher V died House Mud, that had ruled the Riverlands for 1,000 years before the Andals came. Catelyn V, A Storm of Swords. House Tully doesn't have the opportunity to be absolute tyrants, and must maintain themselves with diplomacy and stable marriage alliances. Family, duty, honour. One of the commentaries for Game of Thrones, by Brynden Tully's actor Clive Russell, explains this surprisingly well, and how Blackfish's decision to avoid a favourable marriage alliance with the Red Wines created an estrangement with his lord brother Hoster. Catelyn could still be cruel or manipulative as a young woman. It may also be quite telling that of the two girls, Jaime found Catelyn more interesting than Lysa. Lysa was not so fearsome as all that. She had been a pretty girl in truth, dimpled and delicate with long auburn hair, timid though, prone to tongue-tied silences and fits of giggles, with none of Cersei's fire. Her older sister seemed more interesting, though Catelyn was promised to some northern boy, the heir of Winterfell. But at that age, no girl interested Jaime half so much as Hoster's famous brother, who had won renown fighting the Ninepenny Kings upon the Stepstones. At the table, he had ignored poor Lysa, whilst pressing Brynden Tully for tales of Maelys the Monstrous and the Ebon Prince. So Brynden was younger than I am now, Jaime reflected, and I was younger than Peck. Jaime V, A Feast for Crows. Besides the differences in their cultural upbringing, their husbands appear to be their primary cause for difference. If Jon died, the list of suspects would be vanishingly short, and unlike Robert, Ned would not have turned a blind eye to that murder, because unlike Ned, Robert is a weak man. Robert is a physically powerful individual. He has a natural charisma and is not as unintelligent as many close to him presume, but he is weak-willed, a slave to popular opinion. He does present a strong public persona, with lavish feasts and tourneys and many acts of mercy to defeated opponents. Robert, however, indulges in alcohol to dull the pain of reality. He overeats, such that when we are introduced to the man at the start of a Game of Thrones, he is over the weight, out of shape. Now it was perfume that clung to him like perfume, and he had a girth to match his height. Ned had last seen the king 9 years before during Balon Greyjoy's rebellion, when the stag and direwolf had joined to end the pretensions of the self-proclaimed king of the Iron Islands. Since the night they had stood side by side in Greyjoy's fallen stronghold, where Robert had accepted the rebel lord's surrender, and Ned had taken his son Theon as hostage and ward, the king had gained at least 8 stone. A beard as coarse and black as iron wire covered his jaw to hide his double chin and the sag of royal jowls, but nothing could hide his stomach or the dark circles under his eyes. Eddard 1, A Game of Thrones. He frequently engages in philandry and prostitution, even during the rebellion to rescue his betrothed Lyanna, probably siring one of his bastard children on a whore in Stony Sept. Well, I might be, when the girl shrugged, her gown slipped off one shoulder. They say King Robert fucked my mother when he hid here, back before the battle. Not that he didn't have all the other girls too, but Leslin says he likes my ma the best. The girl did have hair like the old king's, Arya thought, a great thick mop of it, as black as coal. That doesn't mean anything though. Gendry has the same kind of hair too. Lots of people have black hair. I'm named Bella, the girl told Gendry, for the battle. I bet I could ring your bell too. You want to? Arya 5, A Storm of Swords. When Robert is angry, frustrated, he strikes his wife. She came to him at sunset, as the clouds reddened above the walls and towers. She came alone, as he had bid her. For once she was dressed simply, in leather boots and hunting greens. When she drew back the hood of her brown cloak, he saw the bruise where the king had struck her. The angry plum colour had faded yellow, and the swelling was down, but there was no mistaking it for anything but what it was. Eddard 12, A Game of Thrones. He strikes his son? I suppose not, the king running his fingers across the table. Joffrey, I remember once, his kitchen cat. The cooks were wont to feed her kitchen scraps and fish heads. One told the boy that she had kittens in her belly, thinking he might want one. Joffrey opened up the poor thing with a dagger to see if it was true. When he found the kittens, he brought them to show his father. Robert hit the boy so hard I thought he had killed him. The king took off his crown and placed it on the table. Davos 6, A Storm of Swords. Robert also physically abuses his staff. For a moment, Robert was so angry he could not speak. He strode across the tent, whirled and strode back, his face dark and angry. He snatched up his breastplate from the ground and threw it at Barristan Selmy in a wordless fury. Selmy dodged. "Get out," the king had said coldly. "Get out before I kill you." Eddard 7, A Game of Thrones. And sends assassins to kill a pregnant teenage girl. The whore is pregnant. The king's fist slammed down on the council table, loud as a thunderclap. "I warned you this would happen, Ned. Back in the Barrowlands, I warned you, but you did not care to hear it. Well, hear it now. I want them dead, mother and child both, and that fool Viserys as well. Is that plain enough for you? I want them dead." Eddard 8, A Game of Thrones. The most scared dog often barks the loudest. Eddard, by contrast, is not weak-willed, and maintains his integrity under most circumstances, barring when he believes his children would be endangered. In sticking to his principles, his honour, he is the stronger man. Which means Catelyn can respect and even love her husband, whereas Cersei hates and despises Robert. Though despite that hate, Cersei has adopted more of Robert's traits than perhaps she would like to admit. The drunkenness and womanizing. Most of him, the Queen was in her cups, Jaime realised. Of late, Cersei always seemed to have a flagon of wine to hand. She had once scorned Robert Baratheon for his drinking. Misliked that, but these days he seemed to mislike everything his sister did. Jaime 2, A Feast for Crows. There was an exchange in Game of Thrones between Lysa and Sansa, which they discuss lemon cakes and how Catelyn used to be an indulgent girl in her youth, which went away after she married Eddard. This was made up, not in the books, but it does illustrate a key point. Cersei is what Catelyn might have become if she too had a weak, abusive husband. And conversely, Cersei, while monstrous as a child, might not have become the monster she is if she had a better husband as a young woman. These two women might seek payback for their husband's betrayal, real or imagined, in kind. So why do I think Arya is the most likely candidate? After all, she happens to be the only one who actually looks like Eddard. The answer lies in means, motive, and opportunity. Now Robb, Sansa, Bran, and Rickon all favour their mother in appearance, with the auburn hair and blue eyes. Arya has the dark hair and grey eyes common to the Northerners. Genetics in Martin's world can be simpler than in modern day, as firstly, it is adapted for a fantasy novel series, but secondly, because the mating pool in noble marriages is somewhat smaller, hence easier to predict the outcome. House Stark, and the North in general, is very genetically insular. That is to say, the Starks almost never married outside of other northern families. Since Aegon's conquest, before Eddard married Catelyn, they had only married the male line outside the north 3 times, twice to Blackwoods and once to Royce. Both houses are of strong First Men descent. They resisted much of the efforts of House Targaryen's queens, Rhaenys, Visenya and Alysanne in particular, to marry the male Stark line with daughters of Southern houses. Even Eddard's alleged romance with the Sharadane honours the requirement of a first men pedigree, a need to keep the bloodline pure. The Tully marriage was unusual, largely suggested to Rickard Stark by his maesters. House Stark comes into the marriage with predictable genetic traits, or homozygotic traits, and importantly, the Stark's grey eyes and dark hair are recessive when paired with Catelyn's blue and auburn. If Catelyn herself had recessive genes which would allow for the same grey eyes and dark hair in her children, there would be more variation in the children, a mix of grey eyes and auburn hair, and vice versa. Thus Arya sticks out like a sore thumb. So what about if Arya was the only one who was Eddard's actual child and the rest were bastards? This doesn't line up with motive or opportunity. For starters, Catelyn had no reason to cuckold Eddard during the rebellion when she conceived Robb. He hadn't given her cause yet, and at the start of A Game of Thrones, Catelyn generally hopes for more children by him, suggesting Rickon is a Trueborn son as well. The wind swirled around him as he stood facing the dark, naked and empty-handed. Catelyn pulled the furs to her chin and watched him. He somehow looked smaller and more vulnerable, like youth she had wed in the sceptred Reservoir 15 long years ago. Her loins ached from the urgency of his love-making. He was a good egg. She could feel his seed within her. She prayed that it might quicken there. It had been 3 years since Rickon. She was not too old. She could give him another son. Catelyn 2, A Game of Thrones. And Sansa, who would have been conceived shortly after the rebellion, possibly around the time Catelyn confronted Eddard about Jon, is also likely Trueborn. It had taken her a fortnight to marshal her courage, but finally, in bed one night, Catelyn had asked her husband the truth of it, asked him to his face. Catelyn 2, A Game of Thrones. Arya, however, was born in the same year as the Greyjoy Rebellion, in 289 AC. We are unsure of the exact timing, but if Eddard was distracted with war preparations, and Catelyn conceived Arya shortly after Eddard departed, she could get her silent revenge. With someone she trusted, but also someone who was close enough in coloration to Eddard that the child's appearance wouldn't spark suspicion. When Cersei conceived her 3 by Jaime, she broadcast her incestuousness for anyone with eyes to see. Servants at Castle Rock knew they were about it. Their mother Joanna knew it. Tyrion knew it. Kevin knew it. The mystery isn't how the small council knew about Jaime and Cersei. The only mystery is how Robert and Tywin didn't. Or did they? If she could have held a parade declaring she gave Robert horns and lived, she would have. Other women in Martin's world don't have the luxury of being so brazen. Therefore, Catelyn would have had to pick a lover who had a coloration similar to that of Eddard. Dark hair, grey eyes, perhaps small and skinny, someone with a penchant for mathematics, a close confidant, someone who would keep her secrets, devoted to her. That's right, you guessed it, Maester Luwin. That was how it was with Lord Rickard Stark. Maester Wallace was his grey rat's name. And isn't it clever how the Maesters go by only one name? Even those who had 2 when they first arrived at the Citadel. That way we cannot know who they truly are, or where they come from. But if you are dogged enough, you can still find out. Before he forged his chain, Master Wallace had been known as Wallace Flowers. Flowers, hill, rivers, snow. We give such names to base-born children to mark them for who they are, for what they are. But they are quick to shed them. Wallace Flowers had a Hightower girl for mother, and an Archmaester of the Citadel for father, it was rumoured. The grey rats are not as chaste as they would have us believe. Old Town Maesters are the worst of all. Once he forged his chain, his secret father and his friends wasted no time dispatching him to Winterfell to fill Lord Rickard's ears with poisoned words as sweet as honey. The Tully marriage was his notion, never doubt it. The Prince of Winterfell, A Dance with Dragons. Maesters aren't always as chaste as they might appear, and with a strong interest in preserving a nascent foothold in the north, they would do what they must to keep the patronage of the Lady of Winterfell. But why would Arya get the dark hair and grey eyes from Luwin, and the other children not get these features from Eddard? Well, best guess, Luwin's dark hair and grey are a more dominant variation. They look the same as Stark colours, but they're not the same genes. If Arya's not a Stark, why can she walk? There was something of a misconception, largely promulgated by the Game of Thrones TV show, by implication, that House Stark is the only noble house in Westeros which maintains skin-changing genes. In the books, however, many other houses of First Men descent seem to maintain their magical heritage in spite of changing religions and demographics. House Blackwood, in the case of Bloodraven, House Losten, Mad Danelle, Bloston, House Hightower with the Mad Maid Melora, House Strong, perhaps Larys, definitely Alice Rivers, amongst others, have demonstrated or at least hinted at magical proclivities. Robert Sweet Robin Arryn is hinted to have some abilities of his own. Whether he gets it from his father or mother, Lysa Tully, is another matter. But it is entirely plausible that Stark children get their magical abilities from their mothers, Catelyn and Lyanna, and not their fathers. In fact, Catelyn's mother, Manessa Went, came from the same castle once occupied by the Lostons, Harrenhal, and hence likely has a magical bloodline of her own. What wife? I feared she'd been hiding under a rock. The northern girl, Winterfell's daughter. We heard she killed the king with a spell and afterwards changed into a wolf with big leather wings like a bat and flew out a tower window. But she left the dwarf behind, and so she means to have his head. That's stupid, Arya thought. Sansa only knows songs, not spells, and she'd never marry the imp. Arya, 13, a strong with swords. The bat is the symbol of House Went, as well as House Lothston. It is curious that both these houses took Harrenhal for their seat, and, coincidentally enough, Arya only starts having her wolf dreams after leaving Harrenhal. Sansa could never understand how two sisters, born only 2 years apart, could be so different. It would have been easier if Arya had been a bastard, like their half-brother Jon. She even looked like Jon, with a long face, and brown hair of the Starks, and nothing of their lady mother in her face or colouring. And Jon's mother had been common, or so people whispered. Once, when she was littler, Sansa had even asked Mother if perhaps there hadn't been some mistake. Perhaps the Grumpkins had stolen her real sister. But Mother had only laughed and said no. Arya was her daughter, and Sansa's Trueborn sister, blood of their blood. Sansa could not think of why Mother wanted to lie about it, and so she supposed it had to be true. Sansa won a Game of Thrones. Why would Catelyn lie about it to Sansa? If Sansa decided to spill the beans, say during a bout of sisterly bullying or one-upmanship, it would risk Catelyn's life and the lives of all her children. It would throw the paternity of all her children into question, be a blot on the honour of both great houses. In Cersei's case, there was a very real danger that she would be executed for high treason, and her children would be put to death as well. And for their own protection, Cersei gave the children no hint of their infidelity. Joffrey was born, lived and died, believing Robert was his father. There was no incentive for Catelyn not to lie to Sansa. But we have Catelyn's POV chapters. Surely we would have some hint that Arya is not Ned's child. Her own children had more Tully about them than Stark. Arya was the only one to show much of Ned in her pictures, and Jon Snow, but he was never mine. She found herself thinking of Jon's mother, that shadowy secret love her husband would never speak of. Does she grieve for Ned as I do? Or did she hate him for leaving her bed for mine? Does she pray for her son as I have prayed for mine? Catelyn 6, A Clash of Kings. We find out through Arya's POE chapters in Storm of Swords that there was apparently an affair, but never once In Ned's POV chapters does he even think of a shower. The only time that name is even mentioned during Eddard's chapters is when Cersei brings it up. Just because it doesn't appear in someone's own POV chapters doesn't mean it didn't happen. It is sometimes noted that the faces on the werewoods seem to resemble some of the noble families that live in those castles. For instance, the werewood in Winterfell has a long, solemn face, which tends to match those of the House Stark. For her sake, Ned had built a small sept where she might sing to the 7 faces of God, but the blood of the first men still flowed in the veins of the Starks, and his own gods were the old ones, the nameless, faceless gods of the greenwood they shared with the vanished children of the forest. At the centre of the grove, an ancient werewood brooded over a small pool, where the waters were black and cold. The heart tree, Ned called it. The werewood's bark was white as bone, its leaves dark red, like 1,000 blood-stained hands. A face had been carved in the trunk of the great tree, its features long and melancholy. The deep-cut eyes red with dried sap and strangely watchful. They were old, those eyes, older than Winterfell itself. They had seen Brandon the Builder set the first stone, if the tales were true. They had watched the castle's granite walls rise around them. It was said that the children of the forest had carved the faces in the trees during the dawn centuries before the coming of the first men across the narrow sea. In the south, the last werewoods had been cut down or burned out 1,000 years ago, except on the Isle of Faces, where the green men kept their silent watch. Up here it was different. Here every castle had its godswood, and every godswood had its heart tree, and every heart tree its face. Catelyn won a Game of Thrones. We also see a similar thing in the Wolf's Den, a prison castle near White Harbour, which is owned by the Manderleys, wherein the werewood is large and fat, almost like Wyman Manderley himself. You have my word on that, though if you die it will not be at Glover's hands, nor Lord Wyman's. Quickly now, with me. Glover led him along a darkened hole, and down a flight of worn steps. They crossed the castle's godswood, where the heart tree had grown so huge and tangled that it had choked out all of the oaks and elms and birch, and sent its thick, pale limbs crashing through the walls and the windows. They looked down on it. Its roots were as thick around as a man's waist, its trunk so wide that the face carved into it looked fat and angry. Davos 4, A Dance with Dragons. Lord Wyman Manderley, and the Manderleys in general, appeared to follow the faith of the Seven, though it's entirely possible that in secret, Lord Wyman has converted to the old gods. I've heard a theory, I can't remember from who, that the heart tree's face mimics the last person to have used it. I'm thinking perhaps it was the opposite, that people who use the heart tree, or people who live around the heart tree, come to look like the heart tree itself, rather than the other way around. Children, infants, fetuses, exposed to the heart tree, slowly become like the face on the heart tree. That's why Eddard and Lyanna and a lot of the Starks naturally look like that long, solemn face. Wyman Manderley and the Manderleys may not have been grossly overweight, just when they came to settle in that region of the north, and came into contact with the weirwood at the Wolf's Den, that they slowly, over many generations, came to take on the attributes of the tree rather than the converse. It could be that Catelyn, during the Greyjoy Rebellion, with all this spare time she had without Ned around, spent time in the Godswood during her stewardship of Winterfell. This was also during the pregnancy, and possibly the exposure to the werewood tree caused Arya to come out more like a Stark than her other children. And I've also mentioned before that Arya didn't start to have wolf dreams, warging experiences until after she had spent time in Harrenhal's Godswood near its own weirwood tree, which has surprisingly not been cut down. Shoving her sword through her belt, she slipped down branch to branch until she was back on the ground. The light of the moon painted the limbs of the werewood silvery white as she made her way towards it, but the 5-pointed red leaves turned black by night. Arya stared at the face carved into the trunk. to its trunk. It was a terrible face, its mouth twisted, its eyes flaring and full of hate. Is that what a god looks like? Could gods be hurt the same as people? I should pray, she thought suddenly. Arya 9, A Clash of Kings. One of Martin's other books from the Thousand Worlds series, called And 7 Times Never Kill Man, involves a plot on an alien world where these humans come to colonize. There's this native species, or at least apparently native, called the Janchi. This very sentient race that almost seem like devolved humans, because they are, worship these pyramids, which are sort of like a hive mind, analogous to the werewolves. Long periods of worship, thousands, perhaps millions of years, cause these Janchi, who were once humans, to slowly devolve into this more primitive state. I suspect there may be a parallel with the werewolves, wherein people who worship them for too long, even over the course of millions of years, like the children of the forest, slowly become like the werewolves, or like the faces in the werewolves, or whoever made them. This alternative conclusion is that Arya mutated in the womb to look more like a Stark. And while this doesn't necessarily discredit the adultery hypothesis, it could also explain this inconsistency in the presentation of Arya's genes. At a deeper level, it may also be a commentary on the nature of worship, wherein rather than just being hollow rituals and prayers and whatnot, worship is the act of becoming a vessel for this deity that you worship. Much like the ancient Greek gods, where they would come to possess you, or said to possess you when you enter a certain emotional state. Ares being like this uncontrolled rage. Worship is the state of becoming a vessel for this ideal, this meta-consciousness. Just a thought. In this final section, I prognosticate upon Arya's future in the books. Or rather, I believe Jane Poole will continue to impersonate Arya without challenge, for longer than is comfortable for the average reader. Most opinions I have heard seem to think that as soon as fake Arya, Jane, reaches the wall, Jon Snow will immediately recognise the deception, as Theon supposes. Oh, and take the Stark girl with you. Deliver her to Lord Commander Snow on your way to Eastwatch. Stannis tapped the parchment that lay before him. A true king pays his debts. Pay it, aye, thought Theon. Pay it with false coin. Jon Snow would see through the imposture at once. Lord Stark's sullen bastard had known Jane Poole, and he had always been fond of his little half-sister Arya. Theon won the winds of winter. However, Jon has died, stabbed to death by his brothers at the end of Dance. Much theory crafting supposes Jon's consciousness will endure, wagging first into ghost, and perhaps later being resurrected by the Red Priest in residence, Melisandre. Unfortunately, from Arya's own chapters in Storm, she learns that being revived by a Red Priest comes at the cost of memories of self. How many times? Lord Beric insisted. 6, Thoros said reluctantly, and each time is harder. You have grown reckless, my lord. Is death so very sweet? Sweet? No, my friend, not sweet. Then do not court it so. Lord Tywin leads from the rear, Lord Stannis as well. You would be wise to do the same. A 7th death might meet the end of both of us. Lord Beric touched the spot above his left ear, where his temple was caved in. Here is where Sir Burton Craigle broke helm and head with blow of his mace. He unwound his scarf, exposing the black bruise that encircled his neck. Here the mark the Manticore made at Rushing Falls. He seized a poor beekeeper and his wife, thinking them mine, and let it be known far and wide that he would hang them both unless I gave myself up to him. When I did, he hangs them anyway, and me on the gibbet between them. He lifted a finger to the raw red pit of his eye. Here is where the mountain thrust his dirk through my visor. A wary smile brushed his lips. That's thrice I have died at the hands of House Clegane. You would think that I might have learnt. It was a jest, Arya knew, but Thoris did not laugh. He put a hand on Lord Berwick's shoulder. Best not to dwell on it. Can I dwell on what I scarce remember? I held a castle on the marches once, and there was a woman I was pledged to marry, but I could not find that castle today, nor tell you the colour of the woman's hair. Who knighted me, old friend? What were my favourite foods? It all fades. Sometimes I think I was born on the bloody grass in that grove of ash, with a taste of fire in my mouth and a hole in my chest. Are you my mother, Thoris? Arya 7, A Storm of Swords. Berwick, whom has been revived 6 times, has forgotten his fiancée's physical features, the castle he lived in, the knight he squired for, and much else about his own identity. Time walked inside a wolf also degrades a man's sense of self. They say you forget, Hagon told him, a few weeks before his own death. When the man's flesh dies, his spirit lives on inside the beast, but every day his memory fades, and the beast becomes little less a warg and a little more a wolf, until nothing of the man is left and only the beast remains. Prologue, A Dance with the Dragons. John might have only died once, but who knows what he will lose in that time. Mayhaps he'll even forget the face of his favourite sister, and Jane might gain a little more legitimacy. But surely this will be corrected when Sansa and Jane finally meet up. Well, no. For Sansa has always wanted a different sister. Sansa once dreamt of having a sister like Marjorie, beautiful and gentle, with all the world's graces at her command. Arya had been entirely unsatisfactory as sisters went. How can I let my sister marry Joffrey? She thought, and suddenly her eyes were full of tears. Marjorie, please, she said, you mustn't. It was hard to get the words out. You mustn't marry him. He's not like he seems. He's not. He'll hurt you. Sansa 2, A Storm of Swords. And besides, as far as she almost know, the real Arya is dead. She threw back the coverlets. I must be brave. Her torments would soon be ended, one way or the other. If Lady was here, I would not be afraid. Lady was dead though. Robb, Bran, Rickon, Arya. Her father, her mother, even Septim Ordain. All of them are dead, but me, she was alone in the world now. Sansa 4, A Storm of Swords. Sansa may in fact continue the subterfuge, for her own gratification, if nothing else. And to make matters worse, Arya herself is having her sense of identity stripped away, in the service to the faceless men of Braavos. The price is you. The price is all you have and all you ever hoped to have. We took your eyes and gave them back. Next we will take your ears, and you will walk in silence. You will give us your legs and crawl. You will be no one's daughter, no one's wife, no one's mother. Your name will be a lie, and the very face you wear will not be your own. She almost bit her lip again, but this time she caught herself and stopped. My face is a dark pool, hiding everything, showing nothing. She thought of all the names she had worn. Ari, Weasel, Squab, Cat of the Canals. She thought of that stupid girl from Winterfell called Arya Horseface. Names didn't matter. I could pay the price. Give me a face. The ugly little girl. A Dance with Dragons. So when Arya finally returns to Westeros, will there be anything of her old life remaining for her? Will she, like Theon, be able to reclaim her identity? Or will her thirst for revenge consume her entirely? And will House Stark seamlessly accept this impostor?